and welcome to day 9 of 30 Days of Terror.
How you do?
I just caught your eye and had to fight from bursting out laughing, and I don't know why. You didn't even do anything.
No.
I just made eye contact with you while I was speaking. And
I'm funny to look at. It is the truth.
You're also, I just can sense all those really funny jokes in your brain.
Have you noticed that since we recorded the last episode about mirrors, that mirror has changed direction, is now looking directly at me?
I mean, I don't think the mirror is looking directly at you, but it does change direction quite regularly.
I've never seen it look at me like that.
For context, it's a mirror it's a hanging mirror that Dan does not like.
And it's looking at me.
And it's staring right at you. Next thing there'll be footsteps.
Don't even joke about that.
No, I'm sorry. So I've got 3 stories for you today, and story number 1 comes from Martine. Now brace yourself. Just get your tissues ready. I wanted to write while listening to your latest episode because I too had a non-scary post-pet death experience. My dog Oz, a schnauzer, died after being sick for a few years. And maybe 6 months after he passed, I would feel him jump up on the bed beside me at night time. Not every night, mind you, maybe a handful of times. It never disturbed me or my other dog, who also slept on the bed. Was I dreaming? Was it just a form of muscle memory? I don't know. But there were a few occasions where the experience was so familiar and normal that I reached a hand out to pet him. The tangible sense of weight landing on the bed, as he always did, in a way that was uniquely his, certainly felt real. I didn't and don't feel a need to process or make absolute sense of the experience, because it was what it was, and I'm perfectly fine with it just being a dream, or maybe being an echo of him coming to rest with his pack one last time, without sickness or pain. It was a reassurance either way, which was perfectly in keeping with the nature of the loyal friend and companion that I knew in life.
Oh, that's really sad. And it's like the dog didn't react because the other dog didn't react because it's his pal.
I just can't. I can't. Martine, that was so beautifully written, and I can't with pet stories, even though it's lovely. And do you know what? I'm in the same boat as you. Just accept it, just for what it is. You don't need to try and rationalize it. You don't need to try and think, was that this, that, or the other? No. Just embrace
Take it. As
it.
it is. If that's how you've interpreted it, that's...
And I mean, there have been countless stories on the Facebook group about people who have lost pets and feeling them come back after they've lost them. I am 100% on board with animals having souls and coming back to their owners. 100%. Except Bim will probably come back as a zombie and start the zombie apocalypse because she's just that kind of bitch. So our second story today comes from George. I live in Michigan. The state is haunted already by a bunch of weirdos, but we aren't here for the living. I've always believed in the paranormal, the supernatural, or whatever you want to call it. And after I listen to an episode, I take time to reflect about it. And embarrassingly so, I talk to myself about it. I'm going to pause there for a second. I talk to myself all the time.
Me too.
When I'm in a car journey on my own, I have full-blown conversations with myself. And I'm here for it.
Yep.
I love it.
I've always spoken to myself.
Arguments have been lost and won in my car.
Best conversations that I ever have are with myself.
I often hear you talking to yourself as well. When you're downstairs and I'm upstairs. Dan is always talking to himself. But anyway, I digress. I ask questions and try to work out an answer. But I think talking out loud was a mistake. Because as you said before, I think I talked my own haunting spirit into existence. I say this because I've lived here for 3 years and I haven't had anything unusual ever happen here. A few days ago, I listened to an episode on my way home. It's about an hour drive and it was one of your shorter episodes. And as I said, I was reflecting about it for the rest of the journey home. Now, I'm a second shifter, so I get home right around midnight. We don't have enough garage space for my vehicle, so I have to park in the turnaround of our driveway. I get home. It's the end of my reflection. and I walk up to the house. As I get to the door of my garage, through the door window, almost as if hiding behind and peeking over the bottom of the window, a snow white little boy's face was staring right at me. Literally 2 feet away from me on the other side of the door. I jumped a little, I won't lie. But I have always had a theory about how to deal with spirits, and that, in my opinion, is to treat them as you would a friend or another human. I simply said, "I need to get in, please move," and opened the door. I've no idea how, but I didn't see this little boy disappear. Like I was forcibly not able to pay attention to it after asking it to move. So I go inside and go to sleep. And nothing else happens from that night. 4 nights later, I was having back pains the whole day. My neck had been sore like I'd slept wrong, and no matter what I did, no amount of ice cured it. The day was normal. I had spent some time with my neighbour, and the whole time at his house the pain was gone. At around 8:45 p.m. I came home, and as soon as I walked in the door, the pain started again. I still had to do the dishes for the night, so I go to the sink, put my music in, and start. And that's when I see him. I was in the middle of putting dishes away when I caught my reflection in my peripheral vision, and hanging on my back was the boy. His hands on my neck and knees sort of in my lower back, and he had the biggest grin, like he was having fun getting an all-day piggyback ride. And the grin was not sinister, but just a child having fun. I kindly asked him to get off now. I've had enough. I look, and he was gone, and the pain stopped. But that night I couldn't sleep, because my uncle, who I live with, was up all night cursing and complaining, but I didn't listen to what about. Just thought he was being his old self, watching some show on TV. So now it's today. It's November 23rd. I was sitting in the living room watching Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix for the 200th time when I hear my uncle in his room say, "What the hell, man?" I thought nothing of it. A few minutes later, he rushes into the living room looking at the ceiling, and he just whispers, "Come here, fast." I follow him to his room, and what sounds like a child's footsteps are walking around above his room. Whatever it is would walk a few steps, stop, and then scratch, like on the ceiling. My uncle said, "I told you, man, I've been hearing things up here the last couple of days. We don't have an attic, but the area between the ceiling and the roof is still open. So if anyone wanted, you could still go up there." Well, guess what I did?
Oh.
Having a good idea that it was this boy, I took a trip up to the crawl space, which, might I add, can only be accessed from the same garage he was in the other night. Shining my flashlight around, I found him. Not in the light, but I saw him in a corner after I'd only just checked it, and I told him that he needed to be respectful at night. We need sleep, but it's okay to play during the day, but to watch out for my uncle's room. I heard a tiny whisper. I don't know what it said, but it sounded thankful. I came down, started watching The Walking Dead, and haven't heard anything since. My uncle is asleep finally, and I think we're going to be fine. I hope. So maybe not exactly Toshio, but really damn close. I hope you can take my story and maybe debunk it, if possible. But I've no idea. Now, I've something for you about the Whistler. The one with the video of the Whistler on the river.
No, thank you.
The whistle sounds exactly like Negan's whistle in The Walking Dead. So either the Whistler is fake, or he's a saviour. Or maybe that type of whistle just sounds, I guess, threatening. So maybe the show used it and it isn't actually fake. Last night, on November the 25th, I returned to work. Had a pretty normal day. Clocked out, and on my way home, on the interstate, halfway home, the boy was walking down the highway towards where I'm coming from. He stopped and stared at me like he was coming to my work to find me, noticed I was driving and just watched me pass. I looked in my mirror and it appeared like he was crying, like I just left him or something. I get home and it just feels like I lost someone close to me. I became completely overwhelmed with sadness and even cried for a little bit. And I went to sleep. And no, I have not lost anyone. I feel like I had this feeling about the boy. And while I was thinking about it, getting ready for work, directly below me in my room, something hit the floor from the basement. I went down there, and upon my descent into the basement, I caught something, completely black, disappearing into the other room in the basement. Now, I've seen enough ghost adventures and listened to you guys enough to know not to fuck with the black spirit. I said out loud, "Fuck you," and went back upstairs. I came to work, and on my break I decided I should probably tell you now instead of wait for more things to happen, in case this demon or whatever is trying to kill me. So if you see George Miller on the Millington, Michigan obituary, just know it was definitely this demon. But on a serious note, I will do some investigation. But I have to be careful. I want to get rid of this thing. Both the demon and the little boy if he comes back. I mean, absolutely not.
No child ghost.
That story gave me proper goosebumps. I was doing that thing where I flail my arms when I'm getting freaked out telling a story.
No, not having that.
I'm
a little bit torn about this story because I don't know whether... I admire the control that he seems to have over the little boy just by being frank and nice
polite,
with it.
Yeah.
However, the inner scaredy cat of me is saying, do not acknowledge this thing. It's trickery.
It's the bit that slayed me was when he caught his reflection and the little boy was hanging on his back.
That was the boy in the highway for me.
Ugh.
Walking down the highway.
I sometimes wish people could see us when we do these episodes because I start to flail like, you know, those little inflatable things outside car dealerships in America.
The Bailey used to have an entrance.
Yeah, I sort of flail like one of those when I start to get freaked out. And Dan is obviously topless.
Always.
Just to let everyone know. I'm sorry. I don't know if you are a George because your name starts with a J, but I'm going for George. Jorge. So, George, I'm not even going to try and rationalise this. I'm just noping the fuck out because this is very Toshio territory. If you're wondering about Toshio is the little boy in The Grudge. That's all I could see the whole way through this story, and absolutely not. I
felt it that sort of, it's that impending, like, around every corner of Dear David. It had, like, elements of that to it as well.
Ugh. That did give me the heebie-jeebies,
and the crawl space as well. What crawl spaces? Well, I know what crawl spaces are for. I get it. It's structural. You need it, but
And just for anybody who doesn't watch The Walking Dead, Negan is a reference to The Walking Dead. He's a character in The Walking Dead, just so you know. I also have realised that a lot of our stories have that 2-note whistle. That lots of people in that story have heard a 2-note whistle, like the Whistler story that traumatised me so. Today's stories are making my skin crawl.
The first one didn't.
No, the first one was the dog one. Okay, yeah. I'm talking about the fact that we also just recorded episode 8 and that made my skin crawl too. I've got one more story for you.
I don't know if I can handle it, but go for it.
And story number 3 comes from Deborah. After listening to the stories other listeners have sent in, I started thinking about the odd things that happened in the house I grew up in. They were so few and far between, it was easy to forget about them, even during my childhood. I hadn't actually thought about the incidents in details for years, but recently they came up because my partner and I were talking about ghosts. Unlike the movies, I didn't feel any narrative related to the incidents. They didn't happen slowly at first and then get more and more terrifying before it ended in a dramatic climax. I didn't get to know the entities. I didn't know if they were someone's husband, child, or whatever. There were just odd, unexplained incidents that happened. The incidents were each their own separate thing, and they didn't seem to be related. I grew up on a farm in New Zealand, literally in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what the first incident was, but when I've told the stories previously, I've always started with the night my older sister and I heard a noise. We were around 9 to 11 years old at the time. My parents had just tucked us into bed and turned out the light. I remember lying in bed across the room from my sister and being really annoyed because she was making lots of noise and I couldn't get to sleep. I told her to shut up, and then she told me to shut up. She, however, did not shut up, so I told her again to be quiet, but she replied that it was me that was making all the noise. We argued for a bit, but then we seemed to realise that maybe we were both telling the truth. I said, on the count of 3, we will both be really quiet and we won't even move or breathe. We counted down and we both went silent. Not a peep was coming from me or my sister. Then the noise started up. It sounded like an old man's raspy, laboured breathing. And it was coming from under my sister's bed. We both freaked the hell out and ran out of the room screaming. We shouted to our mum and dad that there was someone in our room, and they both came up to investigate. They looked in the wardrobe and under both of our beds, and of course there was nobody there. My mum said it was probably just a possum. Where I live now, I often hear possums from my bedroom, and while they do make creepy as sounds, it is slightly different to what we heard. Plus, that doesn't really explain why it seemed to be coming from inside our room, under my sister's bed. I don't like saying that it was a ghost, because if ghosts are real, then they don't need to breathe, because they're dead. But I can't specifically remember in detail another time when I heard the noise. My sister claims to have heard it a few more times. A little while later, she got her own room, and I had that room all to myself. But I must have heard it a couple of times, because I remember being really afraid at night time, a lot in my early tween years. Throughout my teenager years, when I had the room to myself, I used to have to go to sleep with the TV on because I was so scared. Another odd thing that happened when I was a kid, and I don't remember if this was before or after the noise incident. I do remember it was in the late afternoon on a summer's day. For some reason, I was laying on my sister's bed with my face down at the foot of the bed. I looked up, and there was a little boy in the doorway opposite me. I remember exactly what he looked like. He was around 5 years old, with light brown hair, big round brown eyes, and a brown woolen jumper and brown pants. I wasn't afraid when I saw him. I was just mildly curious. I blinked, and then he was gone. And I never saw him again. I must have been a skeptic even as a kid because I assumed it was my eyes adjusting to the light after having them closed. I never really thought about the boy for the next couple of years. And it wasn't until I was in my late teens or early 20s that I even thought to tell anyone. My sister once saw an ornament fall off a bookcase in our room for no apparent reason. Another time, my mum was changing the sheets on my bed, and she got a fright after seeing 2 ghostly handprints right above my pillow. She showed me the handprints after I got home from school, and she got me to put my hands on them to see if they lined up. They didn't. The handprints were slightly longer and slimmer than my hands, and the fingertips were also slightly pointed. They were quite freaky looking because of how ghostly white they were. My mum tried to wash them off the wall, but they just wouldn't come off. It was only when I was 16 and we repainted the room that they disappeared. While most of the odd things did seem to happen in my room, I can remember 2 occurrences where they happened elsewhere. The first one happened to my mum, but I was home at the time, so I remember seeing her being a bit freaked out. She went outside one night to get some more firewood from the shed at the back of our property. We had no lights out there, so it was completely dark apart from maybe a torch and the moonlight coming through the door of the woodshed. My mum was loading up the wheelbarrow when she felt someone behind her grab her on the shoulder. No one was there, and she came running back into the house. She asked if it was one of us kids playing a practical joke on her, but it wasn't any of us. We wouldn't have been bothered to go out the back of the property in the dark on a cold winter's night just to scare my mum, and if we did, we would have found it too funny to keep it a secret. The second occurrence that happened outside of my room is also the last one to date. I finished high school and moved out of home and on with my life. However, one night when I was around 20 or 21, we were having a family dinner back at home. My brothers, sister and their partners were there as well. Something to note about the house is that the kitchen and dining room are in an open plan room with just an island separating them. My siblings and I were sitting around the table chatting while my mum was cutting some veggies in the kitchen on the island. She stopped cutting, put the knife down and walked to the stove. I remember seeing the knife fling itself off the bench and across the dining room and land at my brother's then girlfriend's feet. Naturally, we all laughed and said the ghost wanted to hurt her. Later that night, my mum walked into the kitchen to put something in the bin, when the lid of the bin rose up and hurled itself at her head as she was walking away. The really weird thing about that night is that I don't remember any of us being scared, or even being that interested in what happened. I've talked about it with my mum and sister in the years since, but it has never been something we classed as scary. It was just an odd thing that happened. This could have potentially been because there was a big group of us all having a good time together. If it had happened to one of us when we were alone, then we probably would have reacted differently. The last incident was about 7 years ago. I haven't heard of anything else happening since, though only my parents live there now, and they can be quite blasé about it all. My mum had a heart attack about a month ago while on holiday in Australia, and she tells the story of it happening like she is a comedian doing a stand-up show. That just goes to show how seriously she takes things. So things could be happening, and she just doesn't feel the need to share it. A few other things happened in my room. Like, I thought someone stroked my face one night, and a few other things like that, but it's hard to know what's real. The above incidents happened when I wasn't already feeling anxious or scared, so I feel like they're more noteworthy and legitimate. After stuff started happening, I began to feel quite afraid in my room, so my overactive imagination probably imagined some of the other things. After hearing you guys talk about epilepsy in a few episodes, I thought I should add that I have temporal lobe epilepsy. I was only diagnosed when I was 19, but I know I had it during my childhood. I hardly ever have seizures now, but when I do, it's mostly blank seizures. As a child, I used to have aura seizures frequently, but during my adult life, I've only had 1 or 2. An aura seizure can signal that a bigger seizure is coming, but generally for me, I would just have an aura seizure and that's it. When I have an aura seizure, my mind becomes disconnected from my body, sort of like an outer body experience, and sometimes I smell things that don't exist. You could argue that some of the stuff I experienced as a child could have just been me having a seizure. Who knows? But it's probably more likely that I had a seizure than actually seeing a ghost boy in my room.
I mean, that might be the case with the seizures, but it doesn't explain the knives getting thrown across the room.
No. A seizure does not explain that bad boy.
No, and you don't get shared experiencing seizures either, do you?
No, you don't. It also doesn't explain the growling under the bed.
No.
The rasping, breathing, I mean. Oh, that gave me the shivers.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
No. Sounds haunted to me. The place sounds haunted. I love how blasé they are about it, though.
Oh, yeah, they're just like, oh, fuck it.
Oh, the ghost is trying to kill you. It literally launched a knife across the kitchen at you.
And they're like, lol.
You're in danger.
I wish everybody could have seen that little movement that you just did. It was great.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it's really interesting that we've, like, in yesterday's episode, we talked about auras as well and seizures. And they are genuine, like, auras are really frightening. I don't have seizures, but I do have migraines. You get auras with migraines too, and they are really frightening. First time I had one, I literally thought I was having a stroke.
I thought I was going blind.
Yeah.
Because I have my auras, I lose sight. So I get like
Me
tunnel,
too.
I get like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And I just thought I was going blind. I was like, oh no, what have I done? And then
Yeah, it's really scary. So and auras obviously present themselves differently and are generally more severe for people who have seizures. So for some people, their aura might be hearing voices, or it might be smelling things, or it might be seeing things. So they can be really frightening for people. But it doesn't sound, a knife throwing itself across the room does not sound like an aura to me.
No. And I like the fact you tried to debunk your own story. And it might explain some of it, like the individual experiences. But there's at least two experiences that you told us about there that were shared with other people.
Yeah. So unless you have the most powerful aura in the world.
Imagine if that was actually the case.
That would be pretty amazing, but also terrifying. So if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find me on Instagram at Real Life Ghost Stories. You can find Dan on Instagram
At 50p Movie Club.
You can find us on Twitter
At Real Ghost Pod.
You can find us on Facebook, Real Life Ghost Stories Podcast. Give us a like and join the supergroup, which is RLGS Supergroup, and the password is
Emma and Dan.
Does anybody actually listen to this point? I don't know
I'm
that
kind of
they
hoping
do.
they are, because there's been a couple recently where we've just lost the plot. Like there was that one where you just like, if you want to find me.
Yeah. What if I'm me on Twitter and me on Facebook, because it's the Emma show. It's all about me. Yeah, I don't know if people still listen to this point, but we'll keep going.
Yeah.
If you want to send in your own story, you can send it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. Sorry, I stole your line. And you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Real Life Ghost Stories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to loads of extra content. Don't forget that if you donate to the GoFundMe of Out to the Woods Wildlife in the month of August, you have the chance to win some Real Life Ghost Stories merchandise. Doesn't matter if your donation is $1 or $1 million, you still have the chance to win.
And if you have $1 million to spare and you'd like to donate it to Out of the Woods, I'm sure they will gratefully accept it.
All those raccoons will be so happy.
Amazing. They will be blinged up. Imagine if you get some more bling. What did I have to do to enter this competition? Just take a screenshot?
So you can, when somebody enters into a GoFundMe, you can see their name. Okay. So you can see all the people that have entered. That's how. Don't worry. Okay. You're not just going to be like, oh no, I now have entered and nobody's seen my name. So just make sure that you do put your name, because if you put it down as anonymous, I'm not going to know who you are. And on that note, we shall see you tomorrow.
Bye.